in an age long, long ago that is really, 1,000 years ago, which you probably should have guessed by now because this is the 4th video in the Mondstadt Aristocracy series. There were once three brothers. There was once a family of nobles, let's put it like that. At their head was their father, who was Landric, and we know basically nothing about him except that he also shares a name with the Abyss Mage, who appears in Diluc's story quest, but we have no known connection between the two of them besides a shared name. We have one of the sons, who is named Ingbert, potentially as a vision since he's described as having elemental energy in his veins or whatever according to Ragged Records, but overall is really not that important. Finally, we have the two who we actually care about. So first up, we've got Parsifal. He's Ingbert's full brother. He's Landric's son. He's a nice dude, kind of. He's also really dumb. Secondly, we have Eberhart, who is the illegitimate son of Landric from a different mother to Parsifal and Ingbert, so he is their half-brother. And in any case, both Parsifal and Eberhart are kind of similar in the sense that they both dislike the state of the aristocracy 8,000 years ago, with, the slavery, the, really just overall lack of nobility thing, etc. And both of them want to change it. However, they have rather, shall we say, differing ideas on how to actually enact this change. So, let's just start with Eberhart quickly. So, Eberhart's idea is, hey, the ends justify the means. I'll do whatever it takes, according to Favonius Lance. He's and justify the means. He's willing to do anything if it means, going back to the days of the ancient aristocracy and back to what he perceived as being, the actual nobility. So, to this end, he takes up the spear, according to Royal Spear, which is really seen as, the weapon of, commoners and gladiators and not fit for nobles, which is partially because they were afraid of it. But other than that, yes. Let's see. So he takes up the spear, he has one made, and also goes out and finds a spear teacher. And this is the Spear Witch of Crescent Pike, who will also become relevant in the next video. But for the moment, we're just focusing on, what happens here. So he takes up the spear, he learns from her, and he gets really good. And then he murders her. After murdering his teacher, goes out, and at this point he has already managed to get Parsifal exiled, which we'll touch on in a minute here. And he goes out on an expedition to Dragonspine. So this aristocratic expedition is organized by his father, Landric, who's trying to essentially prove the power of the nobility to everybody else. And to prevent, rebellion, essentially. And Eberhart is like, oh, wow, wouldn't this be, such a great time for me to murder everybody on this expedition? So he goes, and there's a few other people on this expedition. So the first one, who we don't really care about at all, is named Luther. Not Luther. We care about Luther. The first one is named Nick, and he dies. He has the resources and supplies, and I'm only bringing him up because he does come up, but that's it. He's really not that relevant. The one we do care about is Luther, who writes the ancient investigation journals that you can find in Dragonspine in that one world quest. So it starts off pretty normal. It's like, oh, Blizzardy, we're looking for stuff. We kind of suck at this. We're really not that good. But it starts off normally enough. And then Eberhart and Ingbert go on a little mini adventure because Ingbert trusted him, I guess, which he really shouldn't have. And Eberhart goes, aha, the perfect time for me to murder him. So he murders Ingbert using his awesome spear skills. So then it's just Luther and it's just Eberhart, and Eberhart chases Luther and manages to murder him. So that's the end of the Ancient Investigation Journals. And during it, Luther also theorizes that, hey, he's trying to do it to gain power in their family, even though Landric was planning to legitimize him later. So according to Favonius Lance, this is probably accurate because he felt gaining power in his noble family would also help him to be able to enact change after doing that. So Eberhart, having successfully murdered everybody on the expedition, being the only one left alive, goes to his pre-prepared boat place and goes and he's like, hey, I've got the supplies, this is in Ragged Records, and he's like, perfect, my plan has succeeded. Unfortunately, what he does after this is completely unknown. We know he made a plan with somebody named Priscilla, and that she would tell him and inform him on the off chance that whether or not it was safe to return to Mondstadt by setting up a light at Stormbearer Point or something along those lines. On a side note, Luther also was like, oh no, Priscilla, how terrible, as he was dying, because he's like, I hope she's alright or whatever, but she was actually working with Eberhart the whole time. Anyway, so that happens, and then as we found out in the quest, there's literally no record of what happened to Eberhart after this, so he gets to live in infamy forever, I suppose. And he didn't do anything else. Alright, But flash over to Parsifal, who is less of an ends justify the means guy, commits significantly less murder. In fact, from what I recall, it stated that one of his weapons, Alley Flash, didn't actually ever get used for murder. Maybe Alley Hunter, actually. But anyway, so he decides to become a Phantom Thief. So he doesn't agree with Aristocracy, and under instigation by Eberhart, who sees this as a great opportunity to get rid of his brother, he decides, hey, I'm going to become a Phantom Thief, because apparently he was really into play acting, because he was a LARPer. Okay, he wasn't a LARPer, but he was really into play acting, apparently. And he decides to become a Phantom Thief who roams around the streets of Mondstadt, who steals from the rich and gives to the poor. He's basically like a, I don't want to say a modern-day Robin Hood. He's the Robin Hood of back then, because back then was not modern day. That was kind of an off-topic tangent. Sorry about that. Anyways, he does that. He meets the same Spear Witch who ends up mentoring Eberhart, falls in love with her, steals something for her, accidentally gets her branded. They have a falling out. We don't actually know whether she died before or after, like, he left Mondstadt, but the chances are pretty good she died afterwards. Anyways, that's also not really relevant in the moment because we will touch on the Spear Witch in the next video. In any case, so he becomes this Phantom Thief. The people actually really like him. Actually, in fact, they write stories about, hey, he must have had such a great life. We're sure he definitely didn't get exiled or anything because everybody loves him. But unfortunately, since this is all part of Eberhart's scheme to become the only heir of their clan, he ends up purposefully getting Parsifal exiled from Mondstadt, and Parsifal has to leave Mondstadt, and he goes to the US. So we see this discussed in Iron Sting. There's also the story in Heart's Desire, but that's not really relevant at the moment. Anyways, we see this discussed in Iron Sting, that Parsifal ends up going to Liyue, where he joins with the Skipper. So the Skipper is from Tales from the Waves, and from Heart of Depth, and he's essentially a guy who's like, wow, wouldn't it be awesome if I went to go kill a giant sea monster? And the rest of his crew is like, yeah, you're so smart, man. They all die in the process. Anyway, that kind of spoils it, doesn't it? So Parsifal joins the Skipper's crew, and he's also very depressed. He says lots of, like, stuff about, like, life sucks. It doesn't matter what happens. And then he ends up going on the Skipper's adventure to go kill a monster, and then he dies along with the rest of the crew, besides the Skipper. And that was the very ignominious end to Parsifal and Eberhart's tale. So let's see. There's a few other points that are worth noting here, which is that for some reason they have a ton of lore about them. Many pieces of information surround them. Yes, okay, so let's just touch briefly on Heart's Desire, which will also come up in the next video. But so Heart's Desire is a fictional book. Well, okay, it sounds fictional, let's put it like that. The other volumes don't have anything we can verify their accuracy with, but it contains a surprisingly accurate, or at least close to accurate, story about the Parsifal and the Spear Witch, because it contains a lot of details that it's like, hey, how in the world would some random, like, book author know these things? About, like, the goblet that Parsifal stole, and, like, the brand on the Spear Witch's face, and, like, Parsifal just in general, so it's kind of weird. We'll also touch on that more in the next video. And then the other thing we should talk about here is the Exile set, because the Exile set is a set where it's, okay, the artifact lore sounds exactly like it's talking about Parsifal, except for the parts where it doesn't sound like it's talking about Parsifal. It talks about an exiled aristocrat whose family got involved in, like, a bloody feud, and a ton of people died, and it just doesn't quite match up. It even has, like, a stolen goblet that formerly had a gem in it, and yet this cup cannot hold water. Well, the one in Heart's Desire can hold water. We also see stuff like, hey, yeah, the family feud, tons of people died, right? But it talks about, like, the aristocrat's house being painted red with blood, and we know that, like, Eberhart committed his many murders on Dragonspine, like, at Dragonspine, which was presumably nowhere near wherever this weird exile's house was. Oh, yes, and finally, like, this other incredibly specific detail that matches up between the two of them is the existence of an azure feather on the exile's chest, and we know from Iron Sting that Parsifal also had this, like, azure feather on his chest when he met the Skipper. Or maybe it's in Heart of Depth, actually. It's in one of them. So the point here is that Exile is, like, weirdly specifically similar to Parsifal's story in general, but also doesn't quite match up in a few places where it really should, and this would probably be easier if I used Shell's Burst, but I'm committed at this point. So all of that said, it's possible that the Exile is a holdover from Beta, perhaps, that didn't quite get changed to reflect new lore, since there are also many other contradictory pieces of lore in the game, like when Vanessa's rebellion actually occurred. Ha ha ha, isn't that fun that we have, like, 5 conflicting dates for this. All of that said, yeah, that's about all I have to say. So essentially they were two similar people who both didn't agree with the aristocracy of their time, but they had very different methods of going about it. And also, just in general, Parsifal was a dumb, if tried to be nice-ish person, but very, very dumb. Made lots of bad decisions. Whereas Eberhart was definitely like ends justify the means, really not the nicest person, very manipulative, killed a lot of people he didn't really have to kill. But he was significantly smarter and like more clever than Parsifal was, as evidenced by his ability to like manipulate Parsifal. So yeah, they're sort of foils to each other. They also have a lot of weird similarities to the story of the Iwakura. Well, okay, not they were. They also have a lot of weird similarities to the stories of the Mikoshi clan in Inazuma, but that's also not quite the most relevant thing to talk about at the moment here, since if we ever get to Inazuma in this YouTube series, we'll talk about it then. Anyway, so that is all for today, talking about Eberhart, Parsifal, and then next episode we'll talk about more people related to Eberhart and Parsifal, namely the Spear Witch, who played a critical role in their stories, and also about the Gladiator, who didn't really play a critical role in their stories, but he knew Eberhart, and Eberhart was like the main thing in his life, and Eberhart didn't really care. Anyway, yep, that is it for today. If you enjoyed these videos, I'm honestly just running out of time here, so you can feel free to end the video so I can grab my artifacts. But anyways, if you liked it, yeah, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. That's about all I have to say, and these artifacts suck. Anyway, that's it for today.